Hi everyone, and welcome to this panel on the art of the pitch. Before we start, we would like to acknowledge that this meeting is being held on the traditional lands of a variety of proud Aboriginal tribes, including the Yugambeh peoples, the Wurundjeri of the Kulin Nation, and the Yugara Nation. We pay our respects to Indigenous elders past, present, and emerging. We recognize that sovereignty was never ceded and that it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So welcome everyone, my name is Jens and I'm IGEA's Director of Industry Member Relations. We have a great panel here today consisting of Meredith Hall, who's Games and Digital Content Officer at Film Victoria, her colleague Liam Rout, Manager of Games and Digital Media at Film Victoria. We have Liam Essler, who's Managing Director of Summerfall Studios, and we have industry veteran John Cartwright, who is currently running his own consultancy. I'd say let's start with a quick round of introductions. So Meredith, what is it exactly that you do at Film Victoria?
So we do a lot of supporting of the local games industry here in Victoria. That's through a variety of production and marketing grants, but also acting as a hub for advice, connections, discussions for all of our developers to achieve their goals. Liam has been doing it for a number of years longer than I have, and I work directly with him. So Liam, would you say that I covered it there, or?
Yeah, I guess between the two of us, Meredith handles more of the day-to-day, and I'm struggling to try to handle the more sort of strategic and directions.
Excellent. Well, let's complete the circle of Liam's. Liam Essler, what have you been up to recently?
Well, a couple of years ago, I founded a studio with industry veteran David Gator. We called ourselves Summerfall, and we're currently working on our first game, which is an adventure musical by the name of Chorus. And a lot of my job is pitching and business development, which was something that I started to become more familiar with when I was working with the Game Developers Association of Australia, where we helped a lot of different indies across the country, and was able to take that into sort of our own business. And it has been a wild ride of education since we started. We've been pitching for a couple of years now. And there are so many things that I wish I had known when I began.
And that's why we're here today. At last, but certainly not least, we have John. John, I know you've been in this industry for decades, so can you give us an elevator pitch of your CV?
Sure. So I started out making games over 30 years ago as a coder, and I've worked in the UK, worked in Australia, done a lot of different kind of projects, pitched for a lot of projects over the years with manufacturers, license holders, all sorts. So I've ended up in a bit of a position doing quite a bit of business development. And in the last couple of years, I've been working more as a consultant, helping developers pull their pitches together, their budgets together, going and representing them at shows and providing production services, and working on occasion with publishers as well, helping them sort of trying to find developers. And then starting this year, I've been offering some training to some of the screen agencies in Australia, helping developers learn how to pitch.
Fantastic. Well, thank you all. I'd say let's get straight into it. So I guess one of the most fundamental things when it comes to pitching is knowing who is your audience. It's different when you pitch to government versus a publisher versus an investor. So, I mean, let's start with government. Meredith and Liam, from your perspective, what is it that you're looking for in a pitch? And how does that differ potentially from, say, a publisher investor?
Well, a publisher is looking to make money off of your partnership, fundamentally. Government, though, has many different outcomes that they're looking for. In our situation, we're often looking for an outcome that has to do with strengthening our local developer community. So bringing a new developer in or establishing someone in a sustainable way is equally as valuable as taking an existing studio and helping them to transform, let's say. And that's a starkly different thing than just having a positive financial outcome or being able to sell to a large number of people.
I think additionally as well, you know, a lot of publishers have a niche or a space that they operate really, really well in and that they specifically aim to grow a portfolio around. Whereas for us, at least, we have to fund in a really broad way. We're looking to support a really wide variety of different people in order to build that ecosystem, which means we're looking at teams making very different things on wildly different scales all the time. So we have a bit of a broader remit than a lot of those publishers do.
Interestingly, we're often helping people to get to the point where they can pitch to a publisher. So they pitch to us to come up with the goods to pitch to somebody else.
Yeah, I mean, we absolutely did that when we first started pitching. You know, we pitched to Film Victoria, and that was an excellent opportunity to hone our pitch and our messaging and what we were talking about. And I think through that process, it changed fairly significantly. And then as we, you know, completed our milestones as well, started to understand sort of the structure of how we should do things, and we were able to take that into our pitches with publishers, which were very different.
And can you maybe elaborate a little bit on the difference? So we have stage one, Film Victoria. We then have the next stage, pitching to publishers. How was that different?
So, I mean, I can only speak for us. I'm sure John can speak much more broadly. But for us, it was definitely, as Liam mentioned, you know, Film Victoria is looking for projects that are going to strengthen the local industry in many different ways. A publisher doesn't give a shit about that. What they're looking for is they really want a project that is going to build their portfolio, that's going to fit in with their sort of direction, their messaging, their niche in many cases, and ultimately is going to make them money. So a lot of your pitch, the value proposition has to change. So with Film Victoria, you're sort of pitching, you know, we're going to create this many jobs, we're going to support the local industry in these ways, we're going to grow our education and the education of the people we work with by doing this. With a publisher, it's much more like we're valuable to consumers. We can prove that. We can show traction. You know, we've done our research. We know that there's a market there. We know that we can reach them, and we you know, have done user testing to show that our game is really, you know, sticky, or is very strong mechanically. It's got a really sort of strong core mechanic or message. So the entire basis of your pitch changes, because what someone is looking for, you know, what a publisher is looking for ultimately is something that is going to make, you know, ideally 5 to 10 times what they put in for them. So, you know, you're definitely trying to think about value in a very, very different way, and understanding like value as a concept is so abstract sometimes. Understanding what that means for different people and different organizations, you know, for us, it was a real struggle at first. And we haven't even talked about investment, which is a whole other type of value, which we're starting to look into now. And, you know, understanding what differentiates and makes you valuable as a business versus a project, for, you know, grants to publishers to, you know, equity investment is yeah, it's massively different, and worth spending the time to better understand.
I think something with the screen industries as well, and I'd imagine Liam and Meredith would, you know, be able to talk about this more. You have very set criteria for what you're looking for with a pitch. You know, you have a set of rules. You've got a checklist to an extent. So you're kind of telling people this is what we want, and if people can't follow it, then that's, you know, it sort of tells you something about their maturity in terms of pitching. But with a publisher, it's maybe not quite as clear. There are certainly some publishers who will say, hey, this is how we want to receive a pitch. These are the kind of games we're looking for. But there is no set one way to pitch to a publisher. There is no, you know, Excel template or PowerPoint template of this is your pitch, right? Clippy doesn't pop up and say, looks like you're trying to pitch. If only. But for you folks there, and I certainly know it's absolutely the same for Screen Queensland up here, you know, there are things they want to hit, and whether that's driving, you know, the money that is granted to be spent in the local economy, absolutely. You know, I think it would be ridiculous to expect that you could pitch and get some money from, say, Film Vic, and then go, I'm going to outsource to Vietnam, because that's not really your business, is it? You know, so it's I don't want to say that it's easy to pitch to a screen industry, but you get given a great deal of guidance on what you're looking for. And the other thing is, obviously, I'm sure it happens all the time, is the developers will approach you and say, hey, look, I'm doing this pitch. Am I on the right track? You know, you're not really going to get that necessarily with a publisher. So you kind of need to do, you know, a lot more work, which is why what Liam sort of says about working with a screen agency on pitching first is just a fantastic preparation before you go off and try and, you know, go commercial with it.
Regardless of who you're pitching to, you're trying to set up a value proposition that says, you put in some money and there's this outcome. That means you need to be very clear about what you're bringing to the party, the value that you've already got in your project or in your ideas, and very clear in what that final outcome is going to be for them. And understanding that outcome is different if it's a government agency, if it's a private investor, if it's a publisher, is really important. And publishers aren't all the same, even, you know, when you're considering them. Publishers in different regions have different sizes. Every publisher has a different profile. And if you're not thinking about that specific publisher when you're putting together a pitch for them, then you're missing a whole lot of your opportunity.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I advise people to do is not to build a single pitch, because it doesn't fit all. So certainly the pitch to a screen agency is going to be quite different to a publisher, is going to be different for investment. But also between publishers, I always encourage developers to tailor their pitch decks wherever possible for the publisher, in the same way that you would tailor your cover letter for applying for any job. You know, it's pretty much the same thing.
There's a core that's always going to be common.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But if you're pitching to Microsoft, it's very little benefit in telling them you're prepared to put it on Switch as well.
But I think that comes down to, as well, for a lot of developers, getting to that mindset of, I need to get a publisher, or I need to get investment funding, or I need to get a grant, without actually thinking about what are the things that I need and I want, not just for this project, but looking forward into the future. If you've got a game that is essentially a game as a service, you're potentially starting a relationship with whoever that individual or that team is for a number of years. Do you want to be managing the marketing? Do you want to be managing your porting processes? You've got to decide those things ahead of time, because otherwise, when you're having those conversations with people, you're going in with an expectation of what you want and need out of it that they have no awareness of. So you need to be clear on that for yourself before you take it to anyone else. I think people can sometimes skip that step with the thing of, we need money and we need funding, we need to move, without necessarily being sure what direction they need to move in.
Yeah, and I think with, perhaps with a screen agency, you're going to provide them with advice, I'm sure, and potentially provide them with the grants and milestones. But for example, you're not suddenly going to go, oh, it's okay, no, we can do the localization for you, or we've got this polling house. That's not your job. Whereas when you go and talk to a publisher, it's like the chances are they're going to say, look, we've got a company that does localization, we've got a company that does PR. So that's one of the benefits you get from going with them. But it means that, so you need to know, you don't need to budget for that if you're talking to a publisher.
And also ownership. What ownership do you want over that messaging? What ownership do you want over your audience? If you're dealing with someone who has a very, very kind of wide market share, if you're dealing with someone like Annapurna who really maintains that relationship with their audience, you need to decide to what extent you're willing to give that away, because that is part of the value you're bringing to the table, and vice versa. So you need to make those decisions early. Otherwise, you run that risk of kind of getting a year or two in and realizing you don't necessarily have ownership over the things that, looking back, you wanted to have ownership of.
Yeah.
So it's not only are we, differentiating between, well, this is a grant, this is an investment pitch, or this is a publishing pitch. You also need to differentiate between publishers, for example. You need to understand what each publisher is looking for. You need to understand, what value they bring to the table. What platforms are they on? Do they help with marketing? Like, how do they treat their audience? How, like, there are so many different things that are important in how you put together a pitch. And I think that a lot of people just assume that, there's a simple structure and that you can repeat that for everyone. And to an extent, that is true. But the wrapping is crucially important. You really have to make sure that each pitch, each time you go and talk to somebody, it's unique. It feels like it was tailored to them, because it was. And you can talk about how you envision your relationship specifically with that publisher. That goes a long way to building trust. And ultimately, that's what we're trying to build here.
So I guess there are two key takeaways there. Know what you want and do your research to establish that relationship. Now, we've talked about liaising with government. We've talked about liaising with publishers. What I'd like to touch on a bit more is talking to investors and some of the differences there. I know, Liam, that you have some extensive experience in that space. So where do you see the major differences there?
I think that when you're talking, this one of the first questions that I ask anyone when they come to me for advice on finding funding is, are you starting a studio or are you making a video game? Because these are two very, very different things, and they require fundamentally different planning and a fundamentally different pitch structure. If you are trying to build a studio, you're looking long term. You need to plan and think 3 projects ahead, even if the end result of that isn't exactly how you start. You need to have a strategy. and you need to be able to articulate that strategy in a business sense. And for me, that has been a really difficult process of wrapping my head around as a very, you know, games oriented person. Like at heart, I'm a creative. And so trying to make the mental switch in terms of like what is valuable has been really is difficult. But you know, you need to, again, understand your audience. So, and what is an investor looking for? They're looking for a return, obviously, but you need to understand, you know, what that return looks like. So for most traditional sort of VCs, et cetera, they're looking for what's called an exit. And I'm sure that there have been a couple of talks today that go through this. So I'm not gonna go through all of that, but I think what's important to keep in mind for the pitch is that, you know, at some point you do expect to exit. You're intending to sell the company or you know, give dividends or some methodology where the investor is, you know, earning money on their investment. So you need to plan through how you're going to do that. And you need to have a structure in place that makes you uniquely suited to whatever you're doing. You need to stand out in some way as a business. Not like, it's not your games specifically that need to stand out, it's your business that needs to stand out, and the way you make games needs to stand out. That's kind of, I think, the key difference that I've learned, at least throughout this process. You know, I went from being like, well, you know, the kind of games that we want to make are really unique. They're very character focused. They're very narrative focused. But when we go and talk to investors, like, they're like, yeah, that's cool. But what are the processes that are unique to you that give you an advantage? What makes you solely and exclusively able to do this? You know, why would I give you money versus another person who's doing character-driven games? And that takes a while to figure out sometimes. It's difficult to really articulate. But again, it does come back to that idea of, you know, have empathy for the person you're pitching to, do your research, understand where they're coming from, and really tailor what you're saying specifically to them, no matter who or what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think thinking from their point of view can make decisions a lot easier. You know, if you're sort of looking, well, they're looking, you know, they're not investing in you because they like you. I mean, they may like you and you sort of hope that, you know, you have that relationship, but it is about making money. It is about having that exit. And it's also, you know, you can look at why wouldn't somebody invest? And that applies for investment as well as a publisher. It's like, well, you know, if you haven't built your team yet, it's difficult to sell the ability to make this game or to build this studio. If you're like, well, no, we'll fill that later. What now? You know, you know, a lot of the value, and you're always, whether you're looking for, you know, publishing funding or whether you're looking for investment, you are kind of selling confidence in your studio, much more so than your game. You know, the game, it's not to say that the game isn't important. They may love the game, but if they don't believe in your studio and your ability to do it, then it's all for nothing. And that's why, as you say, Liam, they want to know your processes. And it sounds very dull to say, well, we use this for source control and we've got this is how we do all these things. But they want the certainty, and they want to know that you've thought of it, so that they know what they're getting into, and that they're dealing with professionals, basically. You know, because that really, with any of these things, everybody's looking for a long-term relationship. Possibly walks on the beach, don't know. But it's ideally, you don't ever want to sign a deal just as a one-off. There's no massive benefit in that for an investor, you know, unless a game goes absolutely gangbusters. Or a publisher for the same reason. You're really looking to build a longer term relationship, which is why, Liam, when you're talking about 3 games, absolutely, franchises have value. You can sell a franchise. Selling a game is difficult. Now, your franchise may turn out to just be a game, and that's unfortunate, and that happens. But if you're not planning it as a franchise, you're tripping yourself up a little bit.
And I think we've all kind of danced around something that is really important for all of these different funding sources, is that potential for prestige and the potential to be the first in on something. That's something that, whether you're a platform, whether you're a venture capitalist, whoever you are, the ability to get on board with something early, take it through to fruition, and then have it be critically or commercially acclaimed is just as valuable, in a lot of ways as the money, because that translates into more money down the track. So whether you're pitching to Film Victoria, if we can look at something and see, wow, this is really special, this has something that people are going to see themselves in or connect to, that carries a lot of weight with it as well. And it's the same for those kind of venture capitalists and other investors, because they want to be able to turn to their venture capital friends and say, yep, we snaked that from you. And it's the same with publishers. Those relationships aren't necessarily, sometimes people think that publishers are all competing against one another, but a lot of the time, depending on their portfolio and what they're looking at, they're usually introducing or passing things over to each other and actually saying, hey, this isn't really a fit for us right now, or our portfolio is full for the next, 2 years, but you would love this. So you always want to be kind of building those relationships, even if they don't necessarily work out first time, first try.
Absolutely. I actually literally had an email yesterday about a client's game. The publisher was saying, oh, look, it's not for us, but I think I know somebody else who might be interested and I can introduce you. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right.
I was just going to jump in and underline one of the things that both Liam and John have pointed out, and that is that you're working to build trust with whoever you're pitching to. That's the essential thing that's going on. And that's something that you do, again, about the way you talk about your product, about where you're going, and understanding what it is they're looking to value to build that trust. But it's almost a game in itself to work out what those elements are and to deliberately go ahead to build that. And it's greater than the words you speak. It's how you speak them, what you put on the paper. All of those things go to build a complete picture. It's not just one element that will convince somebody. In fact, it's usually the lack of any bad elements more than the specific things that you've mentioned. I think the lack of any apparent risks or unmanaged risks anyway.
Well, yeah, work towards that long walk on the beach. One of the things we've kind of touched on is, and I know this is $1 million question, but what are some things that make a pitch attractive or viable? Are there some things that are universally applicable? We talked about that there needs to be a bit of a core that, has a different wrapper depending on your audience. Is there such a thing?
I think
no golden bullet. There's no golden bullet. And I think that's one of the hardest things, especially for a lot of first-time developers to understand, is that, like John was saying, there is no Excel template. There is no way that you can, find a 10-page pitch deck that someone else has done and go, perfect, we can adopt this with our information. Making a pitch attractive and viable depends so much on what you've decided your value is and how you're communicating it. And that varies, because if your game is stunningly gorgeous, but you're not focusing on the art in that pitch deck, that might not matter. So have you figured out what your unique selling points are? What are the things that set you apart, regardless of who you're talking to? And have you figured out a way to communicate them is key.
Confidence and self-knowledge, I think, are underpinning most positive pitches that we get. If you don't have self-knowledge, but you've got all the confidence in the world, you're pitching without any idea. And if you don't actually understand, your own confidence, you can have a great proposal that just doesn't seem like it can possibly work.
I think there is one thing that is worth focusing on early, which is marketing and audience. And it's a thing that I think that a lot of game developers don't like to think about, because they just want to create something cool. But the reality is marketing isn't a thing that comes in at the end. It's not PR, it's not social, it's not community. The most important part of marketing is deciding who your audience is, which is a decision that you should make very early, because it influences every single part of what you do, how you pitch, what data you use to prove your business case, etc. So for us, our focus is very, very closely on sort of like the narrative RPG audience. Like when we talk about RPGs, it's the audience that prefers narrative content in role-playing games. And I don't mean like RPGs necessarily like Baldur's Gate. It's games that have role-playing elements. It's a much broader idea. And that audience, they like specific things. They're on specific channels. There are specific ways of reaching them. It's an audience that can be quantified with data. These games have been successful in this space, and we know why that is the case, and we know how they communicated about their games. And if you know all of that, you can build a really compelling pitch because you're saying that there is an audience that you know the size of, that you know how to reach. That is a recipe for making money if you can make the right product. So, you know, once you have those elements down and you start to, you know, build out what your game and what your core mechanic is, you know, that's what you should be thinking about. Like, how do I make something that is easily, the way that I tend to think about it is what's remarkable about it to these people. And I don't mean remarkable in the, oh, wow sense. I mean, that's great. But remarkable in the sense, like, it is easy to remark about. It's easy for them to talk about, because word of mouth is always going to be the biggest sales mechanism for any product ever. So making sure that to your audience, your game is almost irresistible to talk about and share is really, really important. I think that that's one thing that can make a pitch go from, you know, mediocre to incredibly excellent, but it's something you kind of have to focus on before you even think about the pitch deck. So
yeah, and I think that's where a lot of people kind of run aground, is that they get to a point where they've got enough of the design down, but the design is kind of focused on this broad space. And so they pull their audience from a broad space. And that's when you see pitch decks that come in that say, you know, you've got people who are aged 18 to 40.
Yeah, males 18 to 40.
Yeah, and it's like, males aged 18 to 40, you may as well tell me people that are alive. Like, that doesn't tell me enough about what this audience is. And I think figuring out how to go beyond that and not think of your audience as this kind of conglomerate horde of peons that are going to buy your thing, but actually as people, where do they hang out? Who do they talk to? What spaces are they engaging with that are completely outside of games? You know, people are consuming all kinds of media. Limiting yourself just to the game space means that you're potentially missing out on audiences that will love what you're creating, but haven't been welcomed before. So how do you figure those things out? And then if you're able to tell a publisher or an investor that story and sell that story and say, I'm ready to take this, I just need you to give me this starting point, they're going to get on board, because that trust immediately is going to be fulfilled in a very different way.
Yeah, I think, you know, going too broad is a really easy mistake to make, because you think, oh, I've got a bigger market. And it's like, well, yeah, good luck with that. You know, it's like having a niche is great, because you will bring people in from the fringes of that niche. It's never as narrow as you think. And actually, you know, narrowing it, you know, if that turns out to be a bad idea, you'll find out soon enough from the publisher. You know, if it's, you know, you don't want to make the niche so narrow that it's essentially the game that only I would play and I want a free copy because I'm making it. That's not going to work. But, you know, you can go to what seem like fairly narrow niches and pull in a whole lot from the side, because there are things that are ancillary. You know, as you say, people who aren't into games, you know, may well be drawn into it because of parallels. And so, yeah, I cringe when people say, oh no, the market's everybody. It
Game for everyone.
Yeah.
You can broaden your appeal from a niche, but it's really hard to focus it once you set your whole, you know, world.
Yeah. And it's scatterguns you're targeting in terms of everything that you do, both along the way and at the end. Because if you're trying to appeal to a myriad of different people, all who have different things that they're going to like about what you're creating, you're going to get to that end point. What press are you talking to? You know, what places are you trying to engage? What influencers? How are you ever going to have a plan that has clarity if you are trying to reach that broad and that wide?
Because I mean, you're not making milk. You know, you're not making something that is just everybody needs. You're making a luxury item as a game, and every luxury product, you know, that might well be organic milk. That's a narrowing of that market, because not everybody cares about the organic and not everybody, you know, is interested in paying the higher price. But it's like, we're not making anything that's as generic as a daily consumable, you know, so it has to have a very distinct, relatively narrow and focused market.
So we talked a bit about the audience and the importance of exactly identifying who that is. And then to expand on that, because Liam mentioned marketing, what are some of the fundamental advice that you can give there? Because I also know that, you know, some inexperienced developers are struggling with that. They're like, I don't know, like Facebook? So it's...
Yeah, none of us get into this to be marketers, I don't think, or very few people. Like, there are very few developers I know who are like, yes, I'm so excited to get into the marketing side of my project. But like, the reality is, it is actually really interesting. And if you kind of, I think that a lot of us have a cynicism about the idea of marketing. And once you kind of get over that and start to look into what it means, it's really interesting, because it's about people ultimately, and what people want and what they like. And that's a fascinating thing. That's what, as game designers, we're designing things that are fun to play for people. That is marketing.
Yeah.
So, you know, game design is marketing in many ways, and it's getting over that mental block is really, really crucial. But in terms of like coming back to sort of a pitch deck, I think that it's hard to quantify the size of an audience sometimes. Comparisons are really great. If you can go out and do product comparisons, like look at other games in the field, like what are games that have been successful that are going to be like yours? Looking up stats from places like Newzoo, who have free stuff available and free reports available in addition to their incredibly expensive other ones. You know, there's a lot of data out there on platforms. You know, Steam Spy is a really great first starting point for an initial like, well, which games in this genre are successful and why? You basically, what you're trying to do is you're trying to build a collection of data that you can use to say, hey, these games are successful. My game is similar in these ways, but it has this differentiating factor. This is why it will be successful in this space. But you need that data, and preferably show that visually too. Don't just throw numbers on the screen. Like if you have no other choice, it's better than nothing. But being able to visualize for people, okay, within the size of like, say, the action adventure space and the kinds of people that play that, like where do we fit in that space visually? Like what is our cross section? What are our strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats in this space? Those are all incredibly useful things to have in a pitch deck to talk to a publisher, because they shortcut a lot of questions that you are otherwise going to get.
Yeah, I think it helps frame things when you talk about whether they're inspirational games or whether they're ones that you see as competitive. But also don't fall into the trap of having just listing successful games, and then you list yours and it's like, well, so what I'm seeing is there are some great games there and I see no reason to invest in yours because they've done it all. You know, so I think what you talk about with differentiation is key. So, you know, it's you know, Animal Crossing but with tractors. I don't know, but you know, you find whatever the thing is. Yeah, totally. We'll talk, but you know, what is the difference? You know, you're not just trying to replicate these games, because you know there's no point trying to compete with them, because the chances are you have no chance because you don't have the money, the resources, or whatever. And also, people want another one in that franchise. They'll buy it in that franchise. You know, we're back to that franchise again. What they want is something that's kind of like it, has some elements of it, but has some different things. And that may come from multiple games, and that will help. Again, I'm sure it helps you at the screen agencies, but also publishers and investors. It helps to frame, okay, where does this product sit? Because again, if we come out and say, oh, this is like a product, you've never seen anything like it before, it's just a massive red flag. If you can't describe what your product is in the context of others, how's anybody going to know they want it?
I can absolutely confirm that, working on a project that is very hard to build a business case for, because, you know, Chorus is a game that is similar to a bunch of things, but there's no direct line that can be drawn to anything in the market. Like, I don't advise that straight away. Like, it's not a strong place to move from, particularly with an early game in your career. You know, you want to pick something that you can do, that you can prove relatively simply, and have a really strong argument for. And sort of along that vein too, one mistake I often see with pitch decks is a lack of understanding of what kinds of games you should be comparing yours to in terms of scope and cost and, you know, scale. So like when I see pitches for narrative games, a lot of them reference Dragon Age Inquisition. A lot of them reference Firewatch. A lot of them reference Gone Home. A lot of them reference Life is Strange. Don't reference those games unless you are somewhat confident that you will be able to create something of that exacting level of quality to that scale and scope, because that's actually a different part of the market potentially. That there's a very specific kind of person who likes that. Maybe you need to be like thinking, okay, what are games that sold in the like 100 to 200,000 units category that are, you know, have simpler graphics where the focus is really on dialogue, for example, and dialogue mechanics. what, you know, I can make a dent in that space. And that is a massive amount of sales for an indie. So, you know, that's a very high level thing for most indie developers. I guess that's another thing, like, understand what is reasonable from a sales perspective. Yeah. You know, it's very clear when you look at a pitch deck where the developer doesn't understand their actual context realistically within the market and doesn't fully understand what they're trying to make. So make sure that you know that.
I think it's an interesting point when you talk about the sort of the level of sales, because I think that's actually, it's an essential thing to know what you're aiming for realistically, but it will also inform who you talk to.
Yes.
You know, if you're looking, for example, at making a title and you're hoping to sell 50,000, you're probably not going to get venture capitalist money for that, because, you know, you're not going to have massive revenue, you're not going to have a massive return. And you're probably not going to catch Ubisoft's attention or something like that. You know, they're playing in a very different space in terms of sales, but there are a host of different sized, like, indie publishing options that you can go to based on that. So it's not that there are no options, but it's, you know, there's no point being foolish and trying to, you know, get a meeting with Ubisoft or, you know, whatever and say, well, so kind of look, I think we could do 50,000 of this. And you're like, no.
Why? Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, every comparison that you put, whether you're putting even, you know, the amount of money that you ask for, all of those things have connotations and all of them add to that framework that you're creating. So every time you reference another game, every time you reference a certain audience, every time you reference sales numbers, you are building the actual framework in the publisher or the investor's head, not what you think you're putting forward, but what they actually are inferring from what you're giving them. And I think early developers have a much harder time with that, both because they're less trusted in their understandings in a lot of way, because they haven't proven that out yet, either with their audience or with a partner, but they also aren't sure what the connotations of what they're putting forward are. One thing that I think every single developer should do early in their development, like first couple of months when they've got that prototype, they've got that idea, is actually look at Quantic Foundry's player motivations and use that to help them translate into what sort of games do we sit in, where are we different, because it will tell you, if you've got a game that you think is like Life is Strange, that will tell you that you are attractive to certain kinds of player types, and those 12 player motivations can help you see where you differ and learn how to communicate that from more of a design perspective, when really it's marketing, which is really, really useful, I think.
I think as well, something that I always have tough talks with developers about, what's your retail price going to be? Because nobody else can decide it for you. You know, you don't want to pitch and go, I don't know, what do you think it's worth? You have to have a well-reasoned argument for why your game is priced at $15 or $20 or $5, because all of that is going to play into what you're looking for. If you're looking for funding, how many copies it needs to sell to recoup it. It's going to, you know, roll into, well, how much, you know, is that going to cost to market, you know, to the publisher? And, you know, is it reasonable to try and sell, you know, if it's your first game, you know, seriously, making it $50, probably not going to be the smartest thing. You know, I mean, there is terrible pressure on indies to make games cheaper, but at the same time, there is terrible pressure not to underprice yourself either and to charge what you're worth. So it's kind of Schrodinger's indie game price, and it's an appalling place to be. But you have to know it, and you have to be confident going forward to a publisher or an investor. And I don't know if it's something that you need at a screen agency level, but if you don't have an idea of what your retail price is, then you don't actually really have an idea of your market. Really
depends where you're at in your process, I think, as well, when talking to us. I mean, I think because prototyping funding in general is really underserviced in the games industry broadly, I think we often end up filling that space for people and that niche where those kind of conversations are so, you know, kind of back of mind at that point, because they're still figuring out how the game's going to play, which just changes that context. But I think, if you're halfway through your development and you don't have a sense of where you might land, that's something you need to sit back and sit with. Chris Zukowski has a great talk about, you know, the fact that, because people go, well, you know, why won't someone spend $5 on my game? They'll spend $5 on a coffee, but it's because they have an expectation of what they'll get from that coffee. If they don't have that expectation from you, if they don't have that trust, they're not going to take that gamble, because you are a gamble. And it is the same with every single publisher or partner you talk to. You are a gamble from the second you walk in the door. So how do you make yourself a gamble that looks like it has the best chance of winning a return?
And that's data, really.
Yeah.
And it's a matter of, you know, they may not believe your data and it doesn't happen, but if you don't have any data, then they certainly don't believe you, you know. So if you're coming in and saying, hey, look, you know, it's going to be a $20 gain, we need this amount of money, you know, they can work out how many sales need to happen to make that worth their while. And as Liam says, it's like they're doing it to make multiple returns on investment.
And make sure that all these things are conscious decisions of yours.
Absolutely, yes.
And that time and again is what comes back to in a pitch. Consciously put what needs to be in the pitch, and consciously don't put what doesn't need to be in the pitch. Choose those comparators, choose that price, be conscious about these things, don't make it accidental.
And be prepared to be called out and justify every single figure.
Every single one.
Why is it $20? You know, where's your 50,000 sales coming from? How have you got to that?
It's a pretty healthy exercise to go through any deck as you make it. If you see a number or a statement that looks like you could question it, prepare an answer for it and like interrogate that. Because if you can't answer that, it should not be there.
Yeah.
Essentially Shark Tank yourself
Yeah,
through that process, 100%.
Yeah.
All right. Should you have a demo as part of your pitch? And what should that look like?
It's the most painful answer, because it's the same for a lot of these, which is it depends. I think, you know, depending on who you're talking to, if you are coming in for prototype funding, you may be at a concept stage, and that might be okay for who you're talking to. If you can sell that concept really clearly and give a sense of what the end user will experience, maybe that's fine. But, you know, if you're turning around to someone that only does kind of publishing and marketing work, and you're like, yeah, you know, we want to make this thing, they're going to look at you and be like, cool, come back to us in 2 to 3 years.
Yeah,
so I think you need to know what that publisher wants.
How much are they trust you to make the thing if you haven't demonstrated that you can make it?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think there's, you know, obviously it's always nice to have a demo. It's a lot easier to sell people on a demo when the thing exists. But I've also seen pitches where there is no demo and the pitch is done for the purpose of building the relationship. So I think something that we need to consider is that not every pitch is necessarily to get a deal signed. You know, I've done pitches for people where it's, hey, look, you know, we've got this idea, we're this team, we're working in this way, we want to talk to you about it. And it's something that you follow up in 6 months, in a year, when you do have a demo or you do have more information. But it's about making those connections and opening those doors and getting into the consciousness of those people.
Yeah.
Because they may like what they see, and, you know, as you say, might be like, hey, can you come back with a demo? Better they say come back with a demo than nope.
Yeah.
You know, come back with a demo is at least encouraging, and it's some feedback that, like, okay, you're on the right track with something.
But it's a nice fantasy, I think, for a lot of developers to think, oh, well, I just need to go to GDC and I need to talk to some people and I'm going to get a deal and it's going to be signed in 2 weeks. And that's never the case, especially with the volume that these people are working through. That they have to make quick decisions. They need to be making these quick judgments because they know they don't have the resources or the time to allocate to everything. So you need to be building those relationships. You need to be punchy. You need to be coming back to those people and doing that over time, because otherwise you're going to find that you'll go and have that conversation. They'll say, great, yep, come back to us when you've got something else. And you'll be like, but I can't because I don't have your money yet.
Yeah. I think there's 2 primary things here, one of which is trust and the other one is risk. So if you have a lot of trust with a particular partner, like either you have made games with them before, or you've worked with them in some capacity, or you have a really established reputation, you have trust, you can go to them with a paper concept and they may listen to you. That's honestly pretty rare. There are very few examples of that. I think there's only a couple of investors and publishers that will even take a paper pitch. One of them is Kowloon. The other one is screen agencies. There are not a lot else. And even then, you know, it's a very difficult argument to make. So it's really good if you can go in. I would still encourage pitching early because it'll help you to refine sort of what value is and what you're looking for, what you're trying to create. but also gives you an opportunity to build trust, because you can say, hey, like, here's, like, I'm not expecting anything right now. I just want to get your feedback. Is this something you might be interested in? If they say yes, and they say, okay, cool, come back with a demo. You come back with a demo in X amount of time. You have delivered on something that you said you were going to deliver. You know, that's huge. That's really, really helpful, because that's what basically the rest of the process is going to be like. Once you sign, it's all about delivery and trust. So, you know, that's a great way to build that by starting early.
I think as well, I would say that, you know, you've got that come back with a demo. Even if you go with a demo, but it's not fully formed, following up at the next event, or, you know, in 6 months or whatever it is, and then you can show the amount of progress that you've got, because again, as you say, that's like some trust and some like, oh, okay, they can do what they say they were doing, or they have done. Okay, cool. And again, it sort of gets you into that, you know, because no could mean not right now. It doesn't necessarily mean no forever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that the other main thing is risk, just quickly, is, you know, whenever you are asking for money from someone, really what you're asking is for them to take on your risk. And so, you know, what a demo does is it helps to mitigate risk on behalf of the funding body. So, you know, the further in development you are, like, you know, the strength of your pitch, the strength of your demo, the stability and, you know, accuracy of your budget, all of these things mitigate risk. So the more risk you can mitigate, the easier of a time you are going to have in pitching something. So a demo, that is where a demo is very helpful, because you're saying you can do something, then you're showing it immediately after, and you're showing it ideally to a level of quality, and then are able to articulate in which ways it will be improved.
And it empowers your champions as well within those spaces. You know, a lot of the time there are people internally at those companies who they play your demo and they love it and they become a champion for you. And you really want to put them in a position to do that and give them as many tools, as many remarkable things that they can take into those, you know, potentially battles when they're having these conversations with certain people to really
that's exactly
sell it on your behalf.
Yeah.
I would just going to throw in that once again, you've got to be conscious of what you're actually communicating with your demo. Not all demos are equal. If you are giving somebody something that actually doesn't help them to see where you're going or obscures where you're going, that's not a good place to be. You need to be very conscious about what you're showing people and be conscious of their time as well. If they're going to spend 5 minutes with their demo, what are they going to see? You know, are they just going to see a bunch of starting screens, or are they actually going to see some gameplay? How are they going to understand that? Be aware of how you speak about your demo if you're bringing a demo in, as well as what's in your demo.
And don't confuse people with it. You know, if you're coming in with a stunning, beautiful game and then you tell this person that, you know, you need a bunch of money for art, that is a confusing conversation, because they're going to be sitting there, maybe they're playing through something that's really buggy and they're like, but what about the rest? So you want to make sure that whatever you're saying, your materials and the things that you're putting forward are speaking to one another and confirming whatever your kind of hypothesis is that you're putting forward.
And if you can't, I was going to say, if you can't get a demo together, for example, if you're on console or if you're on a mobile device or whatever, that, you know, you can't guarantee somebody will have a video.
Yeah.
Is just the best thing. You know, I've found that when I've been at GDC, when I've been at Gamescom, I always have a video on my phone.
You just pull it up.
You bump into people all over the place, not just the scheduled meetings that you might have. You find, you know, you get introduced to somebody when you're standing at a bar or you're having a sandwich and it's like, oh, okay. And you can just, you know, you're not going to bring out your laptop. Don't be that person, but you can bring out your phone and you can show them, oh, hey, this is what it's at. And, you know, there's so much opportunity with that. And a demo, it always seems to be, every time you do a demo, there will be a crash. Unfortunately, it just seems to be the luck of the draw. But at least with a video, you know, you press play, that's it. Unless you're out of battery, it's going to go
don't store it online.
You want it.
Don't store it online either.
Oh God,
so
no.
You don't have to stand there and do the awkward, how's your day going, while it buffers for, you know, 1,000 years on whatever shoddy Wi-Fi that you are connected to from 1,000 miles away. Just avoid that for yourself, and have video and photos and screenshots and as much stuff and information. And also, I think having on hand a pitch deck that you can tailor really quickly if you are in that process of having those conversations, so that you can leave, pull everything you need together and have it ready to go and send off, you know, as quickly as you need it. Give yourself as many resources to make it easy as well as what you're giving them to make it easy.
But the demo play experience is much more powerful than the video experience. The video experience can support play experience excellently, but if you're able to let someone play your game, the communication they get is like 1,000% more. And frankly, if I was funding things myself, I would never be likely to fund something that I couldn't play and understand in that kind of visceral kind of way.
Hey, we have about 6 or 7 minutes left. So let me wrap this up with the last question. So here you are. You know what you want, you have a unique product, you've done your research, you have a great team, you're ready for that relationship. How do you get the date? How do you actually do the outreach and handle the conversation to get to the point of pitching?
Follow every single one of any people you can find at that agency or the place that you are pitching on as many of their social medias as you can, because a lot of the time they will tell you, they will actually post about how they want to receive pitches. They will post about whether they accept them, intros in DMs, whether they're happy to be introduced. Some of them are much more cagey than others. Some of them have a full guide on their website. So it really, again, depends on who you're talking to. But doing that research should help you find that. But additionally, reach out to people who have been published by them. And if you're in a conversation with a publisher as well, it's really important to remember that you are bringing a lot of value. You do have a lot of power in that conversation. And that means that you want to be sure that you're working with the kinds of people that you want to work with for a number of years. Most people in this industry are very good, but there is always the chance that you're going to work with someone that isn't as great and is looking to get a really great deal. So make sure that they will be willing to introduce you to other developers that they've worked with. Make sure you can reach out to those people, whether you're at the start of that process and trying to get an intro or trying to connect with them, or whether you're towards the end of signing and you're wanting to confirm that, there's nothing to be concerned about, and you want people to turn around and say, oh my God, we love working with them. You'll have the best time. Let me introduce you to Sarah. She's going to love you. Like, that is the conversation you want to be having.
Yeah, and I think obviously events, like GCAP and GDC and Gamescom, there's usually like meet to match or some sort of similar system for, developers and publishers to connect. And that's been super useful. You're going to end up talking to more people, and not everybody's going to be quite right. But the more people you talk to, the closer you're going to get to finding a publisher, if that's what you're after.
Yeah, I think asking people sort of pitching it to your friends and building out your network. Pitching to people who own studios and can give you feedback is great, both for the feedback, but also because they can help to connect you with the right publisher or the right partner. I think that is probably the way that I've done things the most, and it is absolutely the best way, because you can get, a warm introduction, somebody saying, hey, I know this person and I trust them. And that also is very, very helpful. The other thing is, it is, by the time everyone is seeing this talk, it is getting late, maybe a little too late, but 11 p.m. tonight, the submissions for GCAP Invest pitching program close. So if you go to gcap.com.au and go to the Invest page, there is a form that you can fill out that will, it's not a short form necessarily, so it may take you a minute, but you can put in all the details of your game. And as part of GCAP Invest, we're hoping to connect you with publishers and funding partners. And that will be happening on the 13th. So if you haven't done this already, gcap.com.au, go to Invest, fill in the form that's linked there, and let us help you, because we want to.
What a great way to, sorry, Mary.
Sorry, I was just going to say, it's important to be aware of false positives as well sometimes, though. There are a lot of places where you can take a game, for example, to a PAX and have people absolutely clamoring for it because they're absolutely, an audience that are looking for something to do and to engage with something. But make sure that you're really critically having those conversations with yourself and with those people that you seek feedback from. Make sure you're seeking feedback from people who will be really honest with you, who will genuinely give you not necessarily what you want to hear, but what you will need to be able to move forward, and be open to hearing and receiving that, which is probably the hardest part of any kind of design process. You love your thing that you're creating, be open to figuring out how to make it even more lovable.
Yeah, I think I would echo that and add that our pitch deck is the artifact that I have iterated on most in my entire life. It is probably in its like over 100th version right now. You know, and don't ever take a pitch deck to a publisher that you haven't pitched to at least like 10 people you know and have torn apart at least twice. Basic rule of thumb.
There you go. All right, look, I think we've come to the natural conclusion of this panel. I've really enjoyed it. Some fantastic insights there. Thank you very much, John, Meredith. Thank you, the Council of Liams. That was really fantastic. So yeah, we'll put the link to the form as well into the chat, so you can check that out. Be great if you were able to take advantage of that. But yeah, thanks again, panel. Good stuff.